2021, and the time is 4:33 p.m. To ensure that we have a quorum present, I'm going to read out the names of the members of the executive committee. And if you're on the call, please say present. Richard Prapart, present. Cullum Clark.
Present.
Don Davison.
Present.
Kathy Estrada.
Present.
Cameron Johnson.
Present.
Hardo Fuentes.
Present.
Ed Tart. Andre McEwen. Lel Melville. John McPherson. James Stanton. Michael Stack.
Present.
John Becker.
Present.
And Ryan Moss. Okay. Thank you. I note that we have a quorum of the executive committee present, and I want to call to order the meeting of the Uplift board the board. The first action item is to get the approval on the minutes from the previous board meeting that were sent out and then re-sent out for the May 25th meeting, which was provided in your pre-read. If there's any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
John Becker, so moved.
Thank you, John. Is there a second?
I second Kathy Estrada.
Thank you, Kathy. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, I ask Alex to note that all members of the executive committee present voted in favor of the motion, and the motion passes. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Remy Washington for the academic update. Remy?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I've got a lot of good information today with our academic update. And so one, I'm not going to bury the lead. I wanted to just start with an executive summary, just some high level takeaways from our data from spring assessment. And just start by sharing that we did see, as we expected, declines in our performance on our STAR end of course assessments. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about where those were most dynamic. And so you'll see the range and decline from our prior testing season in 18-19 range from 7 to 46%. I'll name here, and I called out here, that mathematics in our grades 3 through 8 and in Algebra 1, we saw the sharpest decline in performance. When looking at that's kind of the holistic picture, but looking more on a micro level and a campus level, I want to be able to just call out each campus did their absolute best to make sure scholars were deeply engaged in learning. But we did see a few campuses that really stood out in terms of their performance on the STAR and end of course assessments. And so in primary, our Fort Worth campus, our newest Fort Worth campuses, Uplift Ascend and Uplift Elevate, had strong performance, and I think that's a good sign that throughout the pandemic they were able to kind of make sure they continue to get their footing as new campuses, but really have strong performance for their scholars on reading and math on the STAR. We saw Uplift Gratis have a very solid year, which was super exciting because in the midst of a pandemic, we had a leader to change campuses. We needed a strong leader to really make sure we were giving our scholars the best opportunity to learn on that campus, and we saw them have a very solid performance on STAR as well. Uplift North Hills Primary and Whitework Hills as well had really good scores, and we thought that was again affirming to see, obviously our oldest campus, but as well as one of our newer campuses have strong performance. In middle school, we saw the same thing happen with Uplift Ascend and Elevate, just having strong performance, just like the primary schools did as well in Fort Worth. Uplift Peak Middle School, super big congratulations to this team that when looking at their data across different subject areas, they were definitely second to North Hills Middle School, who had like pre-pandemic performance levels, but Uplift Peak Middle School had one of the most solid performances of all of the middle schools in our network, especially on their Algebra 1 assessment. They had the highest pass rates in the entire network. Of 95% of their scholars that sat for the exam passed the Algebra 1 exam. So I thought that was a super big thing for that campus to be able to do in such, dynamic and trying times. And in high school, it looks like we didn't have too much strong performance in high school, but actually their data is much more clustered together. And so there's a little bit less variance in performance in high school. But again, Uplift North Hills, following the middle school and primary, has strong performance on the STAR and STAR end of course assessments. I'll get a chance to talk about our MAP scores, because there's, how kids did on STAR versus how kids did on MAP, and tell you how we're going to relate those two things a little bit in like a few short minutes. But I did want to note that our scholars grew from fall to spring, about 6.2 RIT points. Our typical network growth from fall to spring was 7.8 RIT points. And so you'll see that we didn't grow as much, but for our teachers and our scholars to give it their absolute best and to have, some growth over the spring semester was pretty amazing. And so you'll see that on average, what that difference in RIT point means is about 1 to 2 months of what we'll call learning loss for this current school year. And then going on to the next slide, a little bit later, I'll also share about our summer programming. We're super excited just to see excitement and investment around summer programming this summer. We have over 5,000 scholars currently enrolled in our summer programming, and enrollment is still open. And so we're excited to see that many of our scholars and their parents are taking advantage of this opportunity to ensure that their scholars continue to engage in learning throughout the summer. Our summer programming is designed to do many things, and so we've got different targeted opportunities for scholars over the summer, where we'll be addressing learning loss, just how do we make sure we can target those key skills that scholars need. We want to make sure we also focus on social emotional learning. Our scholars have been through a lot, and so what do we need to make sure that they are tending to with regards to self-management and their well-being is also a component of this summer programming. And our typical opportunities that we offer, EOC retesting and ACT prep for our high schoolers, those are pretty standard in our practice. But we also lastly just wanted to make sure we added some really cool enrichment opportunities that it's fun to learn as well. And so this year our scholars, didn't get the opportunity to come in person for many of the enrichment opportunities. So we wanted to make sure we offered a dynamic group of comprehensive enrichment opportunities for all scholars. And then the last thing on our executive summary is that I'll share a little bit later about our plan for accelerating learning during the fall. And so I'll talk in detail about some of the intentional shifts we'll make in our curriculum in order to make sure we're spiraling in what should have been previously learned content, just to make sure scholars get it, but also the prerequisite knowledge and skills. We'll talk about what are some of the in-school interventions that we will use, like during the school day, to make sure that we are targeting our scholars' areas of need. And then we're going to give it our best shot to do some individualization and provide high impact tutoring for our scholars. This is like you guys, I'm letting you in on a secret. Our primary leaders don't know this on Monday, but we're able to offer Chromebooks one-to-one for all scholars in grades 3 through 12. And so just super excited to be able to share a lot more information about that with you guys tonight. The next slide. I'm going to just share, I went over a little bit about what I'll share today. The data is slowly coming in. And so literally up until Friday, I was getting new information to add to the deck. So today I'll give more of a high level summary of our data, and I'll do a SWOT analysis, just showing where our strengths and opportunities to change practice coming up in the fall. And I'll talk about, again, how we're going to address our scholars' needs for both summer and fall. In August, the update will be a bit more comprehensive and definitely geared toward many of the things you guys shared that you would like to hear more about when sharing our academic data. We'll do an evaluation of our summer programming. So I get to talk about what's included today. I'll get to talk about how well did we do and what was the impact of all those efforts when we meet in August. I'll talk about just a deeper dive into scholar assessment performance data. I'll be able to disaggregate that data by demographic group and learning option, so we can just figure out what did we learn about what we did in this last school year and what impact that might have on us changing our practice for the upcoming school year. So I'll share the learnings that we have that we're taking into the upcoming school year. And then I'll go ahead and share some highlights from our return to in-person, because by that point we will be back in school. And so we'll have an opportunity to share how things are going. When talking about, you guys may remember this, and I joke with my friends and family that I've got like pandemic amnesia, but I brought this slide back today because this is a slide I shared in the fall about where our students began this school year. So if you recall, this is according to our MAP data. We experienced a bit of COVID slide, and we had an average Scholar RIT score of 205.6. which was a bit atypical. Like in a typical year, we would have expected our average Scholar RIT score to be 207.1. If you click to the next slide, I'm kind of showing you where we actually ended this school year, taking off from the fall.
Remy, I'm so sorry. This is Dawn. Someone please mute yourself. I'm having a little trouble hearing Remy. Thank you.
Okay. So if you look at where we started in the fall at the 205.7, the number in the second box here, you'll see that we ended the year at a 211.9 average RIT score. The data team was able to project out looking at our average growth of where we would typically grow if that would have been our fall score. And obviously we fell a little bit short of our 213.5 predicted RIT score growth. And so what that really amounts to is about 1 to 2 months of like learning loss in terms of what we see in terms of our scholar performance. And so I just want to, again, shout out our teachers and leaders for just the work they put in to be able to grow scholars this much through so much adversity. And now we'll talk about like where I think we saw the impact. If you go to the next slide, of this 1 to 2 months of learning loss, I think you see this show up in our grades 3 through 8 reading star performance. And so this table, and there's a lot of numbers on here, but if you look to the left, it shows the approaches. And approaches is like the minimum passing bar for the assessment. And so it shows like where our scholars scored in grades 5 through 8. And you'll see that those rates somewhat increase as you go up in the grade levels. If I orient your eyes to go to the right, I tried to share with you all what difference the change from school year 18-19, the scholars who were in these grade levels in 18-19, their pass rates for the STAR assessment. And so what you'll see is the change in the far right column in terms of the difference in performance between these cohorts of students. And so I want to name, we were really, really pleased that we were successful in getting about 85% of our scholars to test in person. That was really important for all of us to have as many scholars come in person so we know, where they are. And we think that's a strong enough number for us to make some really good decisions around how we shape curriculum and our supports for our scholars for all of the subject areas going into the upcoming school year. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to share the mathematics performance. So one of the other things I shared in the fall that MAP, NWEA, the company that makes the MAP assessment, they predicted that the learning loss would be the greatest in mathematics. Again, we see this playing out in our network for our scholars. You will see it's a pretty drastic decline when comparing our minimum passing rates in this current school year to those in 18-19. And you'll see the change in the far right column in terms of where the students were, what grade levels the students were most impacted throughout the pandemic in mathematics. This next slide shares our high school division star data, our end of course assessments. And so, this is by subject area. Again, you're going to see this same theme play out with mathematics. For both Algebra 1 in middle school and Algebra 1 in high school, you'll see a very drastic change in our pass rates when comparing to 18-19. And it's a little less drastic as you go down through English 1, English 2, US history, and biology. On the next slide, I was able to get some comparison data from surrounding districts and peer charter networks. You'll notice Again, Algebra 1 was where we scored the lowest for us as a network in terms of our pass rates. You'll see that across the the districts and our charter peers that people had similarly low performance as well. So again, that is a theme that I expect to see as we see more data over the coming weeks, that mathematics was impacted the most. But you'll see for the other subject areas, we are above our district peers in terms of pass rates for the other subject areas. And you'll see that IDEA had strong performance in most of the EOC tested subject areas. And we know that their curriculum is more tightly aligned to the end of course assessments. We can go ahead and go to the next one. So I did a bit of a SWOT analysis to look at where we strong and where there just opportunities for us to do some things differently going into the next school year. You see, again, I talked about the attendance to in-person testing. We've got a better handle on how scholars are performing. We saw, again, our high school performance in English 2 and in U.S. history. They saw the smallest decrease in performance. And so we think that's a place that we can easily make up ground with our summer retesting efforts. And you saw that there was some, again, I shared earlier about the strong performance from different campuses where we did see some strengths that we can, really go back and look at what those campuses did to get that, to have that level of performance. And then again, for our schools that we're testing for the first time, talk about a different challenge than most of the other schools in the network. We saw the strong performance from, again, Elevate and Ascend, both primary and middle. And so they were in the top half of their divisions. And so that's fantastic work on behalf of those teams. I think overall, the declines across each subject area, the low rates of meets and masters. So I talked about the lowest minimum threshold for passing that counts as passing. We have a lot more work to do to support those scholars who scored in the approaches range, to provide them also with the interventions necessary to meet the grade level expectations. Again, math was the area of the biggest need. And then it would just require us, with more students not passing their end of course assessment, so any decline in assessment pass rates for end of course assessment, it just requires more students who are going to have to retest over the summer and in the fall. And so that typically is just, how do you make sure those scholars get the support they need? And how do you do that within the summer and the master scheduling in the fall? That typically is a challenge for our high school leaders. We think there's just opportunities for us to differentiate the support for our students who need more math support and reading support. We know that there's just a need altogether across every grade level to really think about our curriculum differently and how we're going to accelerate the learning in both the reading and math in every grade level. And we know that we know that our scholars who we just anticipate, again, I don't have the disaggregated data, but the scholars, our EL scholars, and our special education scholars will need additional targeted supports that we will need to be intentional about planning. And I've had a number of conversations today with different team members talking about, man, when students come back and teachers come back, once they, see the data, probably more holistically, how are we going to relieve the stress and the anxiety around students wanting to perform a lot better? Going into the school year. So we have to be intentional around how we're going to support our students with their own self-management and stress management as well. I think just in general, next year is going to be different, right? More students, all students will be back in person. And so we're going to have to be intentional around how are we creating the climate and culture around making sure students are reacclimating to in-person learning, after a pandemic. And so that's actually something that no one's ever had to do before. And so we'll have to be really thoughtful around how we plan to do so. I think it's just making sure our teachers understand and have a clear idea of what's expected of them, because they're going to feel that increased urgency. And lastly, I think it's just we'll have scholars who will have experienced, summer slides. Typically students, if they don't engage in some learning over the summer, they typically slide more. So the 1 to 2 months could potentially double, if students aren't engaged in some sort of learning over the summer. And so we have to be very thoughtful about how we address these things. So on the next slide, I want to talk about our plan for the summer just to address those threats I just talked about. We have our 3-week programming that we've talked about throughout the year that the team began planning sometime in October, where we targeted our students in the lowest quintiles and those who did not pass their STAR assessments. And so in that, with those group of students, we're really targeting, the areas in which they need to shore up their content and skill knowledge. But in addition to that, we are having intentional programming with the help of Dr. Gasco's team around SEL supports for those students, and also just having an opportunity for students to just have a holistic experience by having both fine arts and PE during the summer. And so those may have been things that they did very little of if they were at home for in-person learning, but for virtual learning, but they'll have an opportunity to do so in our summer programming. We also created summer assignments. I was really happy that all the folks in a network, all of our leaders got behind having common summer assignments for our scholars, that are posted on our websites and available at our campuses for students to continue learning over the summer. And so those are assignments that teachers will collect at the start of the school year that are aligned to making sure kids are ready to jump into learning in the fall. We do have our summer enrichment programming. Again, learning should be fun. And so we've got, I think, some of the coolest programs this summer. And when they opened up, people were definitely jumping in to get their scholars enrolled in them. So I'm really happy that our parents are invested in these experiences. So we've got activities from robotics, coding, theater, creative writing, even our scholars engaging in internships, just having different opportunities for enrichment, just to help address, any engagement issues for getting scholars involved. And last month, you guys voted to make this happen, to make sure that scholars who are engaged in EOC test prep, which just ended last week, they're testing this week, so fingers are crossed that things went well, that they can earn a scholarship for participating during their summer EOC preparation time. And so they have a one-to-one tutor. It's a third-party tutoring organization who's been working with a little over 200 students over the last 2 weeks to prepare for those assessments. And we'll again offer a virtual ACT prep for our scholars who are retaking the assessment again this summer and in the fall. I want to share just the enrollment numbers. Again, like I shared when talking about the executive summary, we've seen just a large increase in the number of students who are taking advantage of our summer opportunities. And so we're super duper excited to see that our parents and our students are invested in making sure that our scholars are continuing to engage in learning over the summer. And for my next slide here, I want to talk just about a high level about our plan to address our areas of need. So I talked about the need for acceleration in reading. We're going to, from a curricular approach, we want to make sure that we're revising our scope and sequences to spiral in content that our data says we need to revisit as a whole network and for grade levels. We also shifted to our a curriculum that's more culturally relevant, and meaning that our scholars have access to texts that are in line with their communities and their identities, and that tell just that give them a much more well-rounded experience in terms of engaging in the literature for their courses. So we have that for humanities and for our reading and English curriculum, K through 10. We are going to differentiate the support for our scholars for math acceleration. As we talked about, math was the area that's the hardest hit. We've been fortunate in our middle schools, and we saw this most dynamically, to partner with Teach to One, which is just a unique math curriculum that offers an opportunity for students to continue learning their grade level content. We're also getting opportunities to shore up their skill gaps. And so we've been fortunate to get a grant to be a participant for about 4 or 5 of our schools to participate and leverage that curriculum. And for our primary and high school courses, we have decided to do a better job of resourcing our teachers with the curriculum and resources they need to provide those additional intervention supports for our scholars. Part of our strategic plan, I think we anticipated this as a team. We've decided to add a more focused, targeted tier 1. So that's the daily classroom instruction that provides supports for our EL and special education scholars. And so that's something that our school leaders and teachers will get professional development on this summer around how to do this daily to support our scholars with diverse learning needs. And then again, we added this to every single division and advisory period. This is something we tried across the network in every grade level to have an advisory period every day, 4 days a week, I should say, during the school year. We're going to keep that, and we have the opportunity to leverage the SEL curriculum that are scripted curriculums that our teachers will be able to leverage every day to support our scholars with their overall well-being, their goal setting, stress management. We'll also just use rhythm. And I know Dr. Gasco talked a little bit about this, just to monitor our scholar well-being every day. We typically did this like on a quarterly basis or twice a year. We have the opportunity to be able to put our finger on how our scholars are doing, on a daily or weekly basis. And for our scholars, our teachers, and our social counselors to be able to respond and support our scholars. And so we're really excited to have this opportunity to add this bundle of resources to our curriculum. We also will have academic programming that will support, this is a tutoring component that I talked about earlier. We're going to have a high quality tutoring program for primary, middle, and high school scholars in both reading and mathematics and some core subject areas for high school scholars. And so this is a program that we are in the process of developing right now, but you'll see a lot of districts are adding a tutoring component to their academic programs as well, just to get the individualized supports that scholars need. And one last thing on the next slide, we are just adding one more thing, if you go back real quick. Just the Chromebooks that I talked about, that, our scholars obviously have been at home with their computers or in school with their computers. And with the support of our IT team, we're able to make sure that our scholars have Chromebooks, which is super duper helpful for the ed tech tools. And we're going to talk about, I'll talk about this when we come back in August, what our strategy is around using education technology. But we're able to provide those for each scholar in grades 3 through 12, and also an opportunity for scholars to get individualized support or personalized practice, on some of our selected network ed tech tools. So super duper excited to be able to provide that differentiation to meet the scholars' academic needs. And lastly, my last slide here. I just wanted to share in August, I'll get the opportunity to come back to share how the summer went, just more of a deeper dive in terms of how did our scholars do and different learning options and demographic groups, and then just what learnings that we take away from the school year in the summer that you will see show up in our practice throughout the year. And hopefully, again, some of the highlights from our in-person learning. So that's all I have to share today. Do I have time for any questions?
Yes, Remy, we actually have about 10 minutes for any questions or reflections, comments from the board.
Great.
So, Ms. Richard, one of the things that I guess is being introduced is the tutoring side, and I guess use of third-party relationships, and just any comments on how that's going and how it seems to be relatively new for a lot of schools, and just how the resources are available.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple of things. So one, we're fortunate to be able to, we're going to hire a person to manage our overall tutoring program. So we're in the process of hiring candidates, and that process will begin next week to get it started. In the interim, members of the teaching and learning team are working with a bunch of people. We were fortunate that Commit has partnered with a number of other partners to be able to support districts in finding these third-party tutoring organizations, because there are a lot of them, but we really need to know which ones are good and will best fit our needs. And so we're in the process right now of learning from Commit and the partners around what, how do districts typically go about this process and what will work best for us as a network. Another thing we've been fortunate is that TEA was like on this a few months ago. And so they've provided like a bevy of resources and a set of programming and trainings for districts to go through. And so those actually, I think, begin tomorrow for districts to do that. Richard, we were just really fortunate that, like, again, that tutoring program I talked about, FEV, who's doing our EOC prep. We've partnered with a couple different tutoring programs, over the last year or so. Just happened that way. It was no intentionality behind that design. And so I think we have got some lessons learned that I think will help inform, our overall strategy. But I would say over the next 3 to 4 weeks, I think our strategy will firm up so that, we could probably have a really good launch, during the first quarter of the school year.
Remy, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Paul, I'm here. Great presentation. Thank you so much. What do you think it is about math in particular? I mean, that column was kind of very notable in terms of the the learning loss there, or I should say the big decline in the percent who are meets or masters. What do you think? Can you give us a little more color there? What do you think's happening?
Absolutely. I think from a just general perspective, it's hard to teach math on the computer. And I think the lion's share of our students were in a remote setting or were learning in simulcast in our secondary. So we're doing this via computer. And so I think some of the basics around pen to paper or pencil to paper, I think we skipped over some of those parts. And so I think just learning in a different modality, I think we did not factor in what needed to remain the same and what resources students still needed to come prepared with every day to engage in learning. I think that's just that's one thing I think me and my peers have discussed. I think secondly, I think that for us, we have a conceptual math curriculum. That's hard enough. It's pretty challenging for students to manage in person. And so a lot of the tactile learning experiences, I mean, just from in terms of classroom management of materials, like even when students were in person, I think those are missing. And I think we realize how important those are to teaching a conceptually based mathematics program for us as a network. I think thirdly, I've studied schools that were successful. When I talked about peak middle school, I went back and was able to look at what teachers leverage the complementary, so usually a curriculum has a complementary, ed tech tool that students can use. The teacher that had the 95% pass rate had the highest usage. Her student had the highest usage of our ed tech mathematics programs. And so I think that the complement that goes with the medium of learning virtually is to use those ed tech resources. And I can say that was somewhere where we had a huge variance in terms of level of students engaging with the individualized learning platforms that we needed to take advantage of. And I think that most people didn't. And so I think we needed a really good strategy. And I think we just didn't put all of those pieces together, in a timely fashion, before the, probably the second semester that I think people's wheels got turning. But I think at that point we were had too much ground to make up.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Again, I think it's a great summary. I know we're disappointed with the overall results, and while we could suggest there's a lot of excuses, I think going forward we just need to kind of apply ourselves in the way we know we can. Again, thank you for the great summary.
Thank you, guys.
Next, we were going to turn it over to the Advocacy Committee. It's been doing some amazing work during a very active legislative session. And Eric or James, I don't know which one of y'all are presenting, but I'll turn it over to y'all.
Great,
It's
thank
Eric.
you. Yes. Hello, everybody.
Yes, so this session, we just found out, thank you everyone, just found out today that the governor has announced the date for our first called special session of the 87th legislative session. As of this late afternoon, we do not know what's going to be on the agenda. However, we are monitoring those issues. So right off the bat, a big win, and certainly something that we are very happy is that our HB3 dollars as well as initiatives were fully funded in the SB1. Last week during the bill signing ceremony, Governor Abbott had line item vetoed Article 10, which is the legislature appropriation budget. So we are very happy that everything in Article 3, which is education, was approved by the governor as well as the lieutenant governor and the speaker. Very appreciative, and I think something coming out of it is where we landed as on behalf of the network was from the legislative budget boards, biennium runs for each district, was a positive net impact. So again, that is something to be very happy with, and allows us to continue our mission. And certainly that's with the help of you, as well as Yasmin, Deborah, James, very appreciative for everyone's work on behalf of Uplift. Where are we at with 1,000+ bills that actually made it to the governor's desk? 71 bills that impact public education as well as charter schools have made it to the governor's desk. The good news is that the positive bills, as well as those that impact public charter schools, no bills were vetoed by the governor. So that's a great testament to his continued leadership and certainly where we are working with our delegation as well as stakeholders. I wanted to provide briefly just some of those bills specifically. There is going to be a post-meeting notes of a detailed list of every bill and what they entail and how that impacts Uplift. Let's see, so it seems like the screen has taken over. So now we can get it back to the slide. Pause right there. Okay.
Well, somehow
I'll
I
go
think
down
we're
the bill.
seeing John's screen, which is, oh, there we go. Okay, perfect.
That's
Thank
okay.
you.
And so what we have, some of the big wins, and I'll continue while we're adjusting the screen, is so some of our priority bills that we'll soon see is like our HB 1525, which was our cleanup bill. Certainly a priority that we had seen was with our teacher incentive allotment, and what we had advocated for last session during the 21 session was, many of you might recall, as getting meetings with not only all the chairs of Senate and the House Committee on Education, the Lieutenant Governor's office, as well as the governor, the Speaker's office, was one of these issues that we saw specifically impact Uplift Education was the special education allotment dollars that was actually in the cleanup bill. Those cleanup bills, there was a number of those bills as they impacted different articles in the bills, SB1 specifically. It's something that always happens every 2 years. It should have been a may instead of a shall. So that is why we're very happy that with Huberty's bill is actually fixing some of those issues. And so we always say, and wonderful, now we all see the screen, thank you. Just going down some of the priority bills. Having teacher training with SB 1444 being a priority bill. We look at TRS, having that opt-out version, another priority bill. These are all things that because of the advocacy, it shows. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, so to speak. Let me
Eric, I might pause you for just a minute for board members who don't know TRS. So TRS is the state's healthcare program, health insurance program. And it was, one, it's expensive, two, it's not great quality. And they locked districts, including Uplift, into it when folks initially joined. And so we really advocated to be allowed to go to the open market for insurance products for our staff. And so this TRS priority bill was to at least allow a further study on healthcare options for teachers and public education staff, and resulted in basically now a pilot that districts can opt into to really explore potentially more competitive and affordable healthcare products for their staff. So that's a huge win and something that matters greatly, obviously, healthcare to our employees. So this was definitely a good win for us.
Thank you. Some of the other legislation that did not make it was the virtual learning option that with the HB 1468, as well as one of the other priority bills that we were monitoring was by Chairman Dutton, as well as Senator Bittencourt, was allowing for charter schools to have the same municipality applicability of traditional ISDs, local laws, regulations as traditional ISDs and charter schools. So those bills had failed. I will tell you about the local remote learning option is that TEA did provide. They're calling it a summary and not officially guidance. And that is something that we were monitoring just for the need of the medically sensitive students that might have required a remote virtual option. Of course, one of the preemptive legislation bills that had passed was the HB 3979, which was relating to the social studies curriculum in public schools. That bill was in fact signed by the governor, and it was our understanding, as the governor has noted, is that will again make it being a special agenda item in the upcoming special session. So just a FYI there. So where we are in the next steps, obviously, noting that the special session being one of the first called special sessions, we'll also have to watch with redistricting, perhaps in the fall, September and October, more than likely. There's some issues in regards to the interim charges. So there will actually be studies, much like the one that had passed last session with TRS being an interim charge. And now you see how it finally makes it to the governor being an issue where they might say needs to be a bill. We'll continue to watch over TEA agency actions as well as committee hearings. Something that I was very proud of is during the last interim is that we had several Uplift leaders within our network actually be on some of the TEA committees. So that was very fortunate to certainly have their leadership with TEA as well as other traditional ISDs and charter schools try to work through some of the issues related to the bill. So if we could find another way to get our leaders on those committees, it'd be very helpful and positive for the network. Continue to do the outreach and communication with our state delegation. Now that we're entering in this post-COVID, post-world, it's something that certainly be nice and welcoming to get our elected officials back to the campuses to see how we're certainly doing our part in educating the future of Texas. And also when we look at other issues, the next 88th legislative session will be around the corner come January 2023, and certainly identifying how we can make the next 2 years better is be very important. So I will certainly pause and glad to answer any questions that someone might have.
Eric, I'm also going to chime in on the virtual school bill for a minute because I think that'll be important for the board. So the virtual school bill died at the end of the session. It was part of, whether it died accidentally or intentionally is honestly unclear. At the very end, we thought people had come to an agreement on what that bill could look like. But once it died and it was then brought that it might be a special session item, obviously the governor hasn't released yet what will be the agenda topics for the special session starting July 8th. I think you saw districts, charter networks, obviously Uplift made this call, say we're not going to offer virtual school for next fall, because at that point of it being a special session item, if the legislature votes on a virtual school bill at the end of July or early August at that point, because they have 30 days and they literally start from scratch on any bill that gets put in for special session, we're literally less than a week out from the start of school. So be able to pivot, it's just not practical. It is practically almost impossible to wait to try to organize a network-wide virtual school 1 week before school starts. And so given that it was, unless you have a virtual school bill, you actually can't get funding from the state for students who attend it. And then you would be just burning ESSER dollars to cover a virtual school on the gap in what the state would have paid per pupil for each of those students. And, no district was going to make that choice. And so I think that's why you're seeing these public announcements of DIC not offering virtual school, IDEA, KIP not offering virtual school for next year. We obviously knew with some of our peers behind the scenes what decisions we all were going to make on it. But that's some of the behind the scenes of why we announced to our families coming out of the legislative session, because there was no bill passed, we will not offer virtual school next year, and all 100% of Uplift scholars will be in person. And to my knowledge, we really haven't gotten much pushback on it. And I think it's because every other district is in a similar situation. So we're not at a competitive disadvantage as we might have been if we made that choice and others, a virtual school bill had passed. So that's just an extra little bit of context on the virtual school bill. Even if we see it play out in special session, I think everyone's kind of made the choice of what they want to do for next year. But if anyone has any other questions on any of the other bills or advocacy items, for us, the big win was the healthcare pilot bill, and obviously the funding bill. We're happy to take them.
Eric, this is Melissa. Can you hear me? Getting an echo. So the fully funded education bill, did we get pushback that charter schools get less or anything like that? I think particularly considering we didn't get approval of the bill that makes us equitable to traditional ISDs in terms of regulations. So that's kind of what happened on that.
Glad to answer that. So yes, part of the pushback, and to answer the question about the pushback, is that's really a testament to both of our chairs in the House Committee on Education as well as the Senate Committee on Education. And the chairs had made it a priority at the beginning of session that their current modes of education, whether that be a parent's decision for traditional ISDs, charter schools, or perhaps even a virtual network, or even, like a home-based opportunity for their respective child, would be respected and honored. And that was literally day one of every committee hearing, is they did not want to hear how one was going to be underfunded, and that they were going to look at areas of underperformance, but that those would be respected. And because of that, I really want to say, and it's a testament also to Senator Jane Nelson, Chairwoman Nelson of Finance, making that a point to add that charter schools, as well as, charter schools would be respected for parents to have that choice. So that's a big applause to them. The second question was related to, and help me again, what was
it was the equity issue. It was the facility equity through the city processing.
Yes. And so I'm glad you brought that issue up, because there was actually a recent Attorney General opinion that I will certainly pause and allow Alex in the future to perhaps address that issue. But Attorney General Paxton had came up with an Attorney General opinion. It was requested by Chairman Taylor of the Senate Committee on Education to look at those the variances and equities of municipalities, having a preference towards traditional ISDs as it relates to charter schools for certain zoning regulations. So that was a good win by the charter school community for recognizing that and having that AG opinion. And of course, you talk about it being in a timely manner. It literally came out, 15 days after session. Some of those bills procedurally died. So votes were taken, we're not going to be able to allow because of procedural issues. And so they didn't quite make it to the finish line, but they were very close, very close.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, Melissa, I'm happy to kind of go into it further if you'd like on the AG opinion, or I'm happy to chat offline.
Thanks, Alex. I did not know that about the AG's opinion, so that adds an additional area of interest for us to be pursuing, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, really kind of in short, and I think Eric kind of nailed it on the head. The AG opinion is just that. It's an opinion. It's not letter of law, but it is certainly seen to carry weight. We're certainly still vetting it out and seeing how it applies to Uplift and our situations, and certainly to charters generally. But to Eric's point, it more or less did two things. Number one, it said that charters and ISDs need to be treated equitably. And number two, that while municipalities can still require, certain levels of permitting for facilities, so special use permits versus PDs, what have you, they really need to do so. They should do so for all classifications of public schools. So all charters and all ISDs need to be held to the same, permitting zoning rules. Again, it's an opinion, not letter of law, but certainly does carry weight with it.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
For sure.
Let's see. One, just direct follow up on that, Eric and Alex, and that is okay. So it's an opinion. And I'm just trying to apply it to our actual situation, particularly in the city of Dallas, where clearly there are elected officials who do wish to use zoning powers in ways that aren't to the advantage of Uplift and other charters, clearly. Do we have the sense that they would feel totally unbound by this, or kind of mildly influenced by it? Or I mean, where does this how does this opinion relate to what city council members actually do with their legal authority?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think it kind of go in a lot of different directions there. Before I go too far into it, Yasmin, I know that you were.
I was going to chime in, Alex.
Oh, okay.
So, Cullum, we are going to cover Luna during our executive closed session and actually talk about how we're strategically thinking about the AG's opinion. So if we can hold, all board members are invited to the executive closed session, which we should easily have time for during our normal board meeting allotment. And we were going to spend a little bit more time on it then, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Could I ask a second?
Yeah. Of course. Of course.
Team. I don't know if Eric's the right person, or Yasmin, whoever would like to address this. Just maybe you all could add a little bit more color, since the governor did have a chance to sign the, for lack of a better term, the critical race theory bill, or whatever we want to, 39, et cetera.
Sure. We can talk about it.
And then he's also indicated, I think it was in today's paper, that he wishes to strengthen it, quote unquote, in the special session. Could you give us a little bit more color as to what you're seeing in terms of implications for us?
Sure. I mean, now that it's going to special session, right, bills start all over from scratch again. So we will need to watch and see how this evolves, is honestly the short answer. We have read the bill he signed, but now that basically gets put to the side starting on July 8th, and they go back to the negotiation table again. The bill he signed, at the very end, lots of stuff was added. It's actually fairly lengthy about what kids should be taught about history, and it's far more inclusive than it originally started. So that was at least a net positive and is representative of far more cultures. What is still a challenge for us, and we hope adjust over special session, is this broad language around current events. And there are lots of details around restrictions around teacher training, which don't always line up to what can happen with kids. So I think because there was this political pressure to get something done before the session ended, like a lot of stuff got added, and the bill is not honestly completely coherent within itself. And so now we'll see in special session what happens when they start over again with the bill. But that's a recap of the actual bill he signed, and now we'll see what happens as they go into special session and what he means by strengthen it. So that's what we know as of now. But I won't know the implications for Uplift until they go through special session. And if a new version of the bill is passed, what does that bill look like? Because it's been through so many different iterations. And then we've also heard there'll be legal challenges, most likely, both procedural and from a content standpoint. So then even if something does pass or the original bill stays, is there a pause put on it because of legal action that could be taken? So right now, honestly, we're just waiting.
Okay.
I hope that's enough detail.
Yeah, given where we are, yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Eric or Yasmin or Alex? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Bingham and John Beckert for an update on the development.
Great. Good evening, I guess now, everyone. It's nice to see everyone. I'll be brief. Before I go into the report, you can go ahead and click to the next slide. Just want to give a quick staffing update on my team. Cassie Hubbard, who's worked in external affairs for 10 plus years, is transitioning to work on the people team under Ann Erickson. She wanted to learn another part of the organization as part of her career development, and I was supportive of that. And so we will be working to backfill Cassie's very tenured position on the team with some successful people. And so we'll keep you updated on that. But in the meantime, if you all do know of strong fundraising professionals that you think would be a great fit with Uplift, please send them my way. We're finalizing the job descriptions, and I'm happy to share those at a later date. But that's my little commercial plug for staffing. So this is our financial report that we want to present at every single board meeting, just to keep you up to date on where we are on fundraising. So the top part, you really see more of the annual campaign, unrestricted type giving. There's fiscal 21 update total. There's just a slot in for a budget for this past year. We've plugged in our budget number for fiscal year 22 and just kind of showed you how much we raised in the previous fiscal year 20. So we look really strong for next year. We've plugged in the number 1.34 million, which we've shared that with you previously in December on our fundraising update as we were making the shift to really moving to not just a capital campaign focused organization, but also including annual fund dollars. We have right there the board member giving. I don't have the percentage on there. It is 73% of our board members gave to Uplift this past year. We'd like to make that 100%. So we're going to tweak the report a little bit to show that percentage somewhere where it makes sense. We also note that we may have raised more money last year than what is budgeted in our annual fund for next year. And the reason we're leaving it at the 1.34 number is, the annual fund is going to be new for us to really strategically raise money for. So we feel more comfortable putting the number that we had planned for and then just use this year as a benchmark. And then we can adjust higher if we need to, either halfway through the campaign or halfway through the year, or really at the end of next fiscal year once we get a few more consecutive numbers, knowing that we're raising money for the annual fund on a regular basis. And then for the capital campaign, you see we've plugged in a $6.6 million number. I know that seems really high. The reason for that is we want to get the Hampton track funded. We have some big capital projects that are going to get underway, and we want to go ahead and get pledges and gifts secured for that, the Uplift Crescendo site, the pre-K at Gratis, some big capital projects that we just will be investing some funds in. We want to make sure we fundraise before they're fully built out, and it's harder to raise money for a built out facility. So I'll pause there. John, do you have anything to add?
No, I think well said. We've made a lot of progress, I think, over the last year, particularly in light of the fact that COVID was a huge distraction, particularly for you and your team in terms of communication issues. So I think we've got a good foundation. As we've been saying over the last couple of meetings, we're going to go after this in earnest starting in September. And you made the comment that the budget in 22 is less than 21, but if you add the 22 budget plus the capital campaign number, it's a big number. It's close to $9 million. So there's still a little bit of work going on how some of these gifts get, what category they go in, et cetera. But if we raise $9 million next year, I think everyone will be very pleased.
Thank you, John. And we plan on reporting this regularly to the board so you can ask us questions. And again, I'll just leave this as an open call. If you have friends, family, colleagues that you think need to start a conversation with Uplift, just getting to know us, please send them mine and John's way, so we can just open that door nicely and see what opportunity may lie there. That's all I have.
Okay. If there's no questions, we're going to move it to finance with Jim Jonke. I'm going to just make a couple of quick comments. You know, Jim's area has you know, the finance committee, just like some of these others, but there's an active board involvement in the finance committee. And so sometimes, you know, the pre-read will have a lot of information or may not even have all the information, because the finance committee itself has received a more detailed review of it. And I know sometimes for those who are newer to the board, there's a lot of concepts that are in here that may not be fully understandable or because they just are, it's so new to them. And so, you know, certainly if you ever have questions after these meetings, reach out to Jim. I know we used to have training on finance. But I just wanted to make that quick introduction, recognizing that not everybody is as close to the data as Jim and the committee and some of the others, including myself and Colin are.
Okay. Good afternoon. We'll take a quick look at fiscal year 21 before it closes next week. Most of the time, we're going to spend on the proposed capital budget and income statement budget for fiscal year 22. I'll spend a few moments on a credit card program, which we need board approval on. And then I'm going to hand it over to Yasmin for a discussion on Delmas Morton. So on 2021, basically the enrollment and attendance are the final numbers for the year. Last month they were preliminary, not quite final. We will get full amount of hold harmless because we met the attendance criteria that TEA set up for us for this, for the fifth and sixth periods of the year. The cash and liquidity and amended expense budget lines, same as last month, no change. We didn't change our forecast. Now on to the fiscal year proposed budget. Next slide. Okay, so here, as you can see under total revenues, our revenues were budgeting to be 40.7 million more than 2021. 21 million of that is ESSER, and 2 million of it is due to increased enrollment. However, costs in the budget are up by 43.7 million. And I'm going to go over more detail on these cost changes on the next page. When you add, so our net revenues, of course, are lower in our budget than they will be in fiscal year 21. But what we have done in the past, and we've still done here, we try to target our budget to have a debt service coverage ratio of 1.3, which this budget meets that target amount. So when we go into detail on the next page of expenses, I just want to call out a few things. First line, you can see here our personnel expenses are up by 31.9 million. About 2/3 of that is due to salary increases and the fact that our C&P is going to be back on full year schedule next year with everybody working with in-person students, scholars. We also have, and the other 1/3 is We have lower vacancy assumptions, employment vacancy assumptions as we move out of the COVID environment. And then we also have additional sections and staff due to the additional growth that's baked into this budget. Now we go down to non-payroll expenses are up by $11.8 million. The first three items, IB program, road to college, and testing costs, they all go up. This is a result of this more travel next year and more in-person testing. So this is now we're going back to full time. So some of these cost categories are going to increase. Another category, facilities related expenses are up by $740,000. This is also due to being back in school full time. Plus now we have a couple more buildings and campuses, including Crescendo, and then the new building at Elevate. Plus overall, when we add kids and sections, we have additional facility related expenses. And then I wanted to point out down on the bottom line, program non-payroll expenses reoccurring. Those go up by $4.3 million. That's mainly because we're getting more money in two types of funding from the state, SCE and CTE. SCE is based on the what category our scholars are, where they live, their zip codes, and the wealth of those particular areas. As we increase with more kids, plus it balances that, the balance of where our kids live, it's differently. We estimate that that's going to be an increased revenue. And in the case of that being increased revenue, you have to go out and we're going to spend that money. We need to spend it. We're required to spend that money. And then the final category to discuss about our program non-payroll expenses, non-reoccurring, are going up by $5.3 million. These are the programs to close the gap. This includes high impact tutoring and also a lot of network PD. The high network tutoring that Remy talked about, and that's in this budget, is worth about $3 million. The other 2.3 is mainly related to what we're doing in the area of PD. That's the revenue and expense budget. Also, what we talk about this time of year is what our capital expense budget will be. We go through this because you're giving the management team the ability to go out if we need to and spend this money on capital expenses without coming back to the board. So for this year, it's a lot smaller than usual because we're not building any new buildings this year, but we do have some projects that we know of. And then as in the past, we usually have about a $1 million provision for unknown capital expenses, which come up during the year. So our known expenses, we're going to lease space for our facilities and IT warehouse. We think the cost of, we're going to rent, but the cost for tenant improvements would be approximately $200,000. We know we will have upfront expenses at the Hampton Track project, so that's $100K. And then we know as soon as school gets out next year, we're going to have internal projects for restrooms at Grand, Peak, and Williams. And we're also putting in new walkways at Peak. That's worth $500,000. Again, if you total them all up, we're asking for a capital expenditure budget of this year of $1.8 million. And I think, okay, I think we have to, are we going to call for a vote to approve this, or we're going to do that later at the end of the presentation?
I would go ahead, Richard, and call for a vote now on the budget. And then Jim, I think you're probably doing the Regions credit card program next. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Richard, if you don't mind, if you go ahead and call for a vote on the budget, we need to do that individually.
This is Michael Stack. I move to accept the budget.
Richard, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So I just asked the question, is there any questions from the board to Jim on the fiscal 2022 budget? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the fiscal 2022 budget as fully presented.
Curtis.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is Michael Stack, a second.
Okay. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, I'll ask Alex to note all members of the executive committee present voted in favor of the motion, and the motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So next I want to talk about the credit card program. Currently, we have it at BBVA. They're no longer our credit provider. Also, we find that their systems for expense reporting are pretty manually based, and we're using a pretty manually based expense process now. So we started to talk to our current credit provider, Regions Bank, about their systems. And what we intend to do over time, we're going to start rolling over to Regions Bank. We're starting with the fleet cards, which is the smallest piece of our program. As you can see here, $5,000 buy. Then we're going to roll it through the year, add in maintenance, central travel, employee cards, and then vendor payment cards, which is the biggest part. It's a way for vendors to pay, and it helps us also. But so we do it in a rolling system so we can validate it slowly. With any credit, just like your personal credit card, when you sign up and you get a credit card, that bank is giving you a line of credit, basically. Same here with this credit card program. They're giving us extra unsecured credit. We have no unsecured credit with Regions today. They're asking for a $1.5 million line. And so we need your approval for me to go ahead and sign the documents and go forward with this, the move of the credit card program.
And Jim, that's similar to what we were required to have with BBVA as well, correct? So we're just transitioning it from BBVA, where we had to have this, to a requirement now with Regions.
Yeah, we have a letter. We all have you always have a line of credit attached to a credit card program, because they're extending credit to us as soon as an employee uses its charge card. That's our credit. We owe the bank for that amount. Yes, no change.
I'm sorry, I accidentally cut off someone who I think had a question. I just wanted to clarify that this is not a new thing, but rather as we change banking institutions, we just have to have the same requirements that we had with the old one.
Are there any questions on the credit card program?
If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution approving the Regions Bank credit card program and authorizing Jim Jonke, CFO, to sign the resolution as presented.
John Becker, so moved.
Is there a second?
Michael Stack, second.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, I ask Alex to note all members of the executive committee present voted in favor of the motion, and the motion passes. Thank you. And thanks, Jim, to you and your team for the incredible job y'all do in a certainly very complex environment, dealing with everything from people, absent employees, to the virtual learning, to how to spend all the ESSER funds.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, now we're ready to do a quick update on the Grand Prairie Independent School District Partnership. I'll turn it over to Yasmin.
Perfect. I'm going to ask if everyone can just check to make sure they're muted again. Maybe it's just me, but I'm continuing to pick up some static. So one of the things we discovered as we did a deep dive into this upcoming year's budget, and of course I've been tracking enrollment, is that our enrollment was declining faster than we anticipated it would be at our partnership school on the primary side with Grand Prairie. Some of you may have remember it started out as Uplift Lee, and then the name changed to Uplift Delmas Morton as part of Grand Prairie ISD's name change process a couple of years ago. And we have seen this decline in enrollment over the past couple of years, where we have not been able to hit what our target enrollment was. As some broader context, Grand Prairie prides itself on being an open enrollment district where families have choice amongst any school in the district. Children are not slotted to a specific school. That makes them such a great philosophical match for us, but it does create a challenge because for other charter networks and ISDs that partner together on a school, an ISD will say, will you please go run this school on our behalf? And there's a set of children that already go there. Every year, we have to go through with our partnership school the same enrollment process that the district goes through that honestly doesn't take place until the end of July, where every child in the network is then picking what school they want to go to. And so as you can see here, 2 years ago, we had 221 students enrolled. Our target has been 275. Last year, we saw a decline, which we anticipated might also be related to COVID, down to 172 students. And we are currently, as of literally yesterday, this 108 number is now 118. So clearly we're 150 kids off of enrollment. The Grand Prairie Delmas Morton part of the school is also off on enrollment. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is GPISD commissioned a demographer to study different parts of their district and to understand broad trends. And one of the things that the demographer found is in the enrollment or attendance zone for Delmas Morton, which also includes our Uplift Grand site, which is a 5-minute drive away, there are only 460 children of school age kindergarten to 5th grade that then you're trying to allocate among Uplift Delmas Morton, Grand Prairie Delmas Morton, and Uplift Grand Primary School. Obviously, kids can drive in from all over the district, but it's actually not a very big attendance zone of what is most proximate to the school. This means on the primary school alone, if we were to continue to operate the partnership school and we stayed at this 108, 118 kids, we would have $1 million loss on primary, and that's obviously nothing we want to sign up for or think is fiscally prudent. So we have engaged our partners at Grand Prairie. I spoke to the superintendent this morning, and Deborah and Jim have been speaking with their respective counterparts and being completely transparent about the numbers and where we need to get to have this make sense and not be detrimental to the overall network. Those conversations have been collaborative, they've been productive. We are still exploring what potential options are. One potential option is if the district is willing to assign kids to Delmas Morton, which we know is a challenge because it goes against their broad open enrollment philosophy. But if they can allocate kids over so we can get to our minimum threshold enrollment, that's one option. A second option is to renegotiate the financial terms of the partnership so that way these losses are not, even if we're low on enrollment versus target, that we're not taking a loss. And then the third option on the table is, do we need to wind down the partnership because of the low enrollment? And so Superintendent Ellis is speaking with members of her board over the course of this week, and also her team. She and I are going to follow up again later on this week in terms of how they are thinking about these potential options. No option has been ruled out as of yet. And our shared goal is to get to a final decision on this by July 12th. And I think we'll continue to know what direction we're headed over the next week or two on that. And so I wanted to make sure I took an opportunity to let you all know early that this was a challenge for us. We got on it as soon as we discovered that it was a situation around the enrollment piece. This is a partnership that I know has had great source of pride for the board, who's been actively involved in it since its creation several years ago. It is a great source of pride for my team. Uplift Delmas Morton is the second highest performing primary school in our network, and it's in the top performing primary schools in GP ISD as well. So we couldn't be prouder of the performance and the collaboration that's happened amongst our teams. We just seem to be encountering a structural issue around enrollment that is causing a challenge. I want to go to the next slide and explain the challenge at the middle school. Then I'll pause for questions and explain the resolution that I'm asking for this evening and approval. So in the primary school, we house inside a Grand Prairie ISD building. Uplift Grand, our standalone campus, is a 5-minute drive. And when the children advance to middle school in 6th grade, the Delmas Morton kids actually come onto an Uplift Grand campus. And then we continue to support them through graduation. And we currently will have 8th graders next year. The challenge in terms of the way the economics are structured right now is that our reimbursement rate at the middle school is fairly comparable to the reimbursement rate we get at primary. But obviously we have debt service that we need to pay on our Uplift Grand building. And if we are not getting the same reimbursement rate or close to it that we get for a typical Uplift standalone scholar, then every time we shift the mix at Delmas Morton Middle School and eventually the high school, where they are taking up a larger percent of the population than our Uplift Grand kids, the economics become sideways for us because we could get reimbursed more from the state for our own recruited student versus a partnership student who's coming over from the primary. This is an easier solve because it's just financial terms need to be renegotiated to get us to a better place. And Superintendent Ellis and I talked about this today. This is the easier solve. The more challenging solve is, what do you do when the partnership school sits in a enrollment zone that just might not have the same supply of children in it, and both sides of the school, the Uplift side and the Grand Prairie side, are under enrolled versus their own budgets. So I believe there will be a solve here, but we are projected to have another $500,000 loss under the current financial terms going into next school year. So I have no desire to ask the board, nor do I think it is fiscally responsible to build into our budget $1.5 million loss related to our partnership schools, despite all the positive benefits that we have gotten from the relationship and the partnership. And so I'll pause for questions. And because this is a fluid process over the next couple of weeks, we do have the option to either call another special Uplift board meeting as we determine which pathway seems the most appropriate, or what Richard and Cullum and I had talked about was asking for a resolution after I take comments and questions to grant me the authority with Richard and Cullum's guidance and a final approval to pick a pathway with Superintendent Ellis that makes fiscal sense for Uplift and obviously for Grand Prairie as well moving forward. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions about the partnership and our current discussions.
Well, I've got several questions.
Sure, Melissa.
To start with, do you think Delmas Morton may close because of the lack of population that is in their catchment area? I mean,
I don't know.
That's the starting
It's
question.
tough.
So then the other question is, I was under the impression under a bill that was passed in the last legislature that if we did a partnership, that in fact you got more money than you would otherwise.
Yes, that is correct. But then we have to navigate the flow through from the district. So
Okay.
actually the money is there. The issue that they have had in the past politically is Uplift actually gets more per student than Grand Prairie does. And so the optics of them flowing through a higher amount to support a partnership student than they get for their own student has been a bit of a challenge. That was under Dr. Hall. It will be interesting to see with Superintendent Ellis's conversations with her board. Again, are they open to renegotiating financial terms because the dollars are there from the state?
Okay.
It's just they would have to get comfortable that there was now a delta between what they reimbursed us and their own reimbursement from the state.
Got it. And then the last one is, so if we don't have this partnership and we don't have the flow of scholars coming from Delmas Morton, do we anticipate that we would still fill our classes as fully as we now do with the transfer of students in?
Yes, we did check that, and that's obviously something we want to be mindful of is going into 6th grade. It's really only because enrollment is so low right now. We literally only have one section of kids in every single grade level. So, there's enough of a wait list at Uplift Grand to go fill 30 kids going into the 6th grade that aren't coming from the partnership. If the partnership had filled out the way we anticipated, where it was, 2 to 3 sections, it might be a bigger risk. But right now we're literally looking at, one section per grade level, which is a really tough school to run. And Superintendent Ellis knows that we've got to be able to get to a place where at least we have 2 sections in every single grade level to make this work.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
There's, Yasmin, this is Richard. There's a lot of different possibilities that came out of your discussion with the superintendent, to which it could go in any direction. And yet, we just have an overall objective, but at the same time, we can be reasonable between the two in terms of where we are today versus where we'd like to be. And so it just seems like it's hard to project where we are, and either the board needs to give us the latitude, because I guess in the end of the day, whatever decision needs to be made and acted upon is going to have because of the start of school, needs to be dealt with sooner rather than later. So I don't know if I guess I don't know, do we need a motion? Do we just need?
We did put in there for a motion if there was board approval for me to continue conversations with the district and then to run a final recommendation for approval by you and Cullum for your sign off. Or if the board prefers, we can come back and call a special meeting on July 12th to engage the full board and get their final sign off. And I'm comfortable with either, whichever way the board prefers. I don't know if there's anyone who wants to chime in with a preference.
I mean, I know that from Colin and my perspective, I think we feel comfortable working with Yasmin and working with the framework that's been disclosed. And I think we could come up with a solution that's workable for both parties, even if it doesn't necessarily mean we're ending this thing, but it just means we could probably come up with a solution. So if the board is agreeable, I'd certainly like to entertain a motion to just allow, Yasmin, Cullen, and I to, and with others on the team to be able to enter into an agreement as it relates to the partnership with Grand Prairie. Is there any concerns on the board or any conversation that you'd like to entertain?
Richard, I realize I didn't add one other piece in. I just want to make sure I'm super transparent about it. So if an option is taken for us to wind down the partnership, we have full intentions to absorb the very small Uplift staff at Uplift Delmas Morton into the broader network. So there would be no negative implications to any staff member. All would have a role inside our network. Just in case that's on anyone's mind, if that is a pathway we find ourselves in.
This is John Beckert. I'm certainly comfortable with having Richard and Cullum represent the full board in the final negotiations. It's obviously going to go back and forth. It's not going to be just one meeting and one resolution. So I think it's a practical solution. So I would make the motion that Richard suggested.
This is Dawn. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you, Dawn.
Right. So before that motion, I have a question. Have we thought about the public view implication of this? And I think that that's just something we have to, there's a reputation management position that we need to take, and for that to be considered in this decision.
Absolutely, Dawn. We have talked about openly that there would be a very detailed communication plan with multiple stakeholders. I mean, honestly, going up to the commissioner to explain any, extreme decisions that have to be made to make sure it's clear on the rationale behind any decision, because, our partnership was what was a big influencer on Senate Bill 1882 that opened up this space to so many. So it's not lost on us at all. Really, first and foremost for me, honestly, is making sure our staff and kids are taken care of. And but we absolutely have in our.
You're muted now.
Hey, Yasmin, yeah, you're accidentally muted yourself.
Sorry. It's not lost on us, that important marketing and PR piece, and the communication piece. It's just right now we're prioritizing making sure we do the right thing for staff and kids and get to that timely decision. But in parallel behind the scenes, we will be working on the communication piece, because we understand that our partnership with Grand Prairie really was used to drive Senate Bill 1882, which expanded these partnerships across the state. So we understand the non-financial benefits and implications of this decision as well.
And a follow-up to that, if this were to, if we were to no longer have the partnership, would that prevent us from other partnerships in the future?
No, and it wouldn't prevent us from other partnerships with Grand Prairie. And,
Okay.
That's another thing that Superintendent Ellis and I talked about. I mean, we have very strong and respected relationships at the most senior level between both organizations. And so that would, we might just have a geographic location inside the district that is now structurally not working for both of us. But that doesn't mean there couldn't be some other part of the district that would make more sense for us to be in.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
And Don, I'll just add this, and again, I haven't discussed this with Yasmin or Colin, but I think in the end, we certainly are aware of what this partnership has meant for the organization. And even if it ultimately meant that through the negotiations, we still had a projected loss, maybe less than where we are today or less than where we were projected to be, that would certainly be considered before we would just terminate it. And it may be something that we even make a decision that, we're going to extend it for another year, but with the full objective that we're not going to be set into the same situation a year from now if we're still operating at the same result. So, I think what you may not have realized from the presentation, though, is if the numbers had stayed where they were, earlier this month, that the loss may be even more than I think what's showing up on this schedule. Somehow I thought I remember a much bigger loss.
That would be the loss. So we adjusted it, Richard. That would be the loss if we were reimbursed at the Uplift standard rate versus the Grand Prairie rate. And so this is like truly getting you to, a break even standpoint.
Right. Okay. But certainly your comments are understood that we don't want to make a short-sighted decision solely for the sake of saving a few dollars.
Great, thank you.
So I've got a motion and a second, and I'll just reread. The motion is to authorize Uplift CEO and the designees being the board chair, the board vice chair, to negotiate the next steps with Grand Prairie ISD regarding the partnership, including but not limited to terminating the partnership on behalf of the board, assuming again that the board chair and vice chair are in agreement. Do I hear any votes against the motion? Hearing none, I'll ask Alex to note that all members of the executive committee present voted in favor of the motion, and the motion passes. Thank you. Alex, I think the next item is to consider where we were on the vote of board members, and hopefully people did have a chance to complete the voting, or at least we have enough votes to move forward.
Yeah, no, we do. We have a total of 17 responses at this point. Thanks to everyone for pulling up the ballot and completing it. Very simply put, everyone, any person who is up for a role has by far been elected to that role. So many thanks to everyone again for pulling up the ballot and taking time to get it done. Certainly, hopefully, this time next year we will be back to doing this in person.
Okay. And I would just make, one minor comment on that. And I guess really last year at this time, when in the middle of COVID and trying to transitioning from to a virtual environment, I think this is something where we just kind of something that slipped through, but we now are caught up with everybody's in understanding where everybody's membership. And I know between Ardo and Alex, it took a little extra effort to get everything up to snuff on it. Again, so I guess there really is no motion. You've got all the votes, and that's the motion itself, correct?
Well, actually, what we need to do is we still need to have the executive committee vote on approving the results. So you should have motion language in front of you to ask for the motion.
Okay. I just want to make sure, and this would be, the motion is to approve the fiscal 2022 board members and the officer election results.
That's it.
Okay.
That is it. Yep.
Okay, so basically what the comment is that the vote itself is affirming that all the people on the ballot that were otherwise on the ballot have already been voted, and now we're just approving it. Do I have a motion, and do I have a second?
This is John. I'll move it.
Okay, thank you, John. Is there a second?
This is Ardo, second.
Thank you, Ardo. Are there any votes against the motion on approving the fiscal 2022 board members and the officer election results? Hearing none, I ask Alex to note that all members of the executive committee present voted in favor of the motion, and the motion passes.
Richard, I'd like to use this opportunity to just recognize two departing board members that we have. So Kathy Estrada has termed out, unfortunately, and Ardo Fuentes has decided to step down from the board because his family's going to get involved, hopefully in Uplift in some different ways, and so he needs to step down from his position in order for them to do that. But I'd like to just take a minute and personally thank both of them. Kathy has been with us since entering the Fort Worth market many years ago, and helped us really establish our presence in Fort Worth. She has been a great champion of all of our Fort Worth schools there. She obviously served as chair of Mighty's Campus Advisory Council, and then transitioned to chair all of the Tarrant County School Engagement Committee. She and her husband supported Uplift Elevate's library, and it is named after her mom, who was an educator. And so I just want to personally thank Kathy for her contributions in Fort Worth before I move on to Ardo. And I don't know, Richard and Cullum, if you wanted to share anything.
Again, I mean, Kathy has been a true supporter of Uplift, in particular with the Fort Worth. I know her physical distance, being in Fort Worth, has not slowed her down in supporting the organization. And, you know, we're forever grateful. And I think she'll have a great memory of being there for the beginning of the Fort Worth and seeing it to where it's got a broader base of students and schools, to where it's, you know, well beyond just probably all of our imaginations of where this thing would turn out.
I guess what I would add, honored to add, is it's certainly been clear to me, as I'm sure it has been to everyone on the board, that Kathy has served Uplift as a board member with just tremendous enthusiasm and intelligence and commitment to the organization and passion for Uplift's mission. And what's been really exciting to see is to have such an ardent champion of our expansion into Fort Worth, which I think we've all had a chance to observe, has been no easy matter. Not something that was sort of foreordained to succeed, and we still have a lot of work to do. But from a standing start, a whole lot accomplished in a hurry, and it sure takes champions, and we have had a tremendous one in Kathy. So Kathy, thank you very much on behalf of all of us.
Thank you, everyone, for all those kind words, and it's just been an absolute pleasure for me to be part of Uplift.
Thank you, Kathy. And Kathy, by the way, has more grandchildren than all of you guys combined.
How many is that?
True. 10. 5 girls and 5 boys.
Wow.
The Estrada clan is big. You cannot doubt them. Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. And for recognition for both Kathy and Ardo's service, I have a special engraved pen to commemorate your time on the Uplift board, and I will send it out your way tomorrow. So thank you, Kathy. And then for Ardo, I just want to thank Ardo for his many years of being on the board as well, and his role as chair of the governance committee. He oversaw our work with Maria Plankton in terms of thinking about how we developed just the strongest structure for our overall board over the past couple of years. And he's just been a wonderful ambassador for the board and the overall organization, as we've welcomed so many new board members. I don't even know the number, under his steerage of the governance committee, and just bringing more champions into our organization. So I am going to personally miss Ardo's presence as well at our board meetings, and I'm so grateful that Dawn has agreed to step in to fill Ardo's shoes as governance chair. And so I just wanted to say thank you to Ardo for his role as well.
And I was just going to add, Ardo has left the organization with a legacy of organization and documentation on roles and responsibilities. And it's certainly going to help us, you know, not only with the transition, but as individuals assume new roles, we can look and thank Ardo for putting all this together. And again, it was just gratifying knowing that behind the scenes, he's done a lot of work in making sure that the governance part worked as well as it has.
And I would also be honored to add something about Ardo. Everything I said before about Kathy, about enthusiasm, intelligence, commitment, and passion applies with equal measure to Ardo. And as regards our governance and nominating functions, it has certainly seemed to me that Ardo and the committee have tackled this with as much thoughtfulness as any effort I've ever seen on any board, and the result is a really remarkable bunch of people that didn't just come together by chance, but a lot of hard work there. A extremely well-functioning board and a increasingly diverse board, diverse in its talents and in every possible way. I know that's a work in progress that never ends, but it seems every step of the way Ardo went the extra mile to see to it that this organization is governed well. It's a lot stronger organization as a result, and we are very grateful.
Well, thank you, everyone. I really loved Uplift in my time there. Enjoyed working with you and the friendships I made. I've said this before, but I've always been impressed by the caliber of the people and your professionalism. And I'd like to thank Yasmin and her leadership team. And I would also like to thank the whole board, as well as past board members. I heard Melissa McNeil on there. I was excited to hear her voice again. And then finally, I'd love to thank the governance committee for all the years of their dedication. Included Don Davidson, Michael Giles, Osa Fisher, Harry Bill, and last but definitely not least, Alex Burke. So I will say, in final thing, I do owe this to my family, who has always been supportive of my involvement with Uplift. So thank you all again.
Thank you. Well said. It's now 6:18 p.m. and we're now moving into the executive session part of the committee. Non-executive committee members are welcome to stay on and attend, but we want to make sure and honor everybody's time and let non-executive committee members drop off if they wish to at this time.
Great. And then Alex, I think you're also going to stop the recording at this point.
Yep, I am doing that now. Thanks.
Cool. I just wanted to give a real
During the closed session. Alex, do we have any committee members who signed up to speak with us during the committee, the community forum?
No, we do not.
Okay. There being no further business before the board, this meeting is hereby adjourned. The time is now 6:35. Everybody have a great summer, and the next time we will get together formally as a board is in
August, and we'll be sending out the 2021-22 school year board meeting dates, and we want to host everyone in person in our new office space. So we are excited to host you all in person for those who can make it, virtually for those who can't, in August. We'll send out that date and calendar invite.
Great.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.